Some African leaders are seen as heroes back in their home country, but abroad they are considered dictators, sometimes the other way around.
We've had more than 100 military dictators in Africa since 1960.
For some Africans, their leaders are considered heroes that brought about prosperity. They freed their countries from the hands of dictators, tyrants who've brought mayhem to the country. But for the outside world, these African leaders are sometimes considered as dictators. Is it because some of these African leaders refused to bow to the wills, the whims and the caprices of Western governments?
We still have many of them, and they are doing the coconut boogie. One swing to the right and 3 swings to the left, a jerk in the air, and then a tumble for a hard landing on the frozen Swiss bank account.
Don't get me wrong, some of these African leaders have divisive records back home. That depends on who you ask. But there is a common trend to see here, and that trend is often that these African leaders who often toe the lines of their former colonial masters often end up staying in power for as long as they are able to keep their oppositions weaker.
Paul Biya's not ready to say goodbye. The 85-year-old politician's been re-elected as Cameroon's president, a position he's held since 1982. Biya seems as popular as ever, winning 71% of the vote. His nearest rival received only 14%. But his opponents say the election on October 7th was flawed.
With all these criticisms against Paul Biya of the French language dominating the English language, which caused the crisis that Cameroon is deeply involved in.
At its root is a division between Cameroon's French-speaking majority and its English-speaking minority, concentrated in the west of the country. For months now, images like these have been pouring out of Cameroon on social media. Some show burning villages, others record acts of torture and killing. Many are too graphic to show. Taken together, these films show a country sliding into civil war as the government tries to suppress an armed insurgency.
Biya is still in power.
This man has won praise for transforming Rwanda into one of the world's fastest growing economies. President Paul Kagame has curbed street-level corruption, attracted foreign investment, and reduced the country's poverty levels.
The country is one of the safest on the continent. The economy is booming. 98% of the population have universal health care, free education. The average life expectancy has doubled. President Kagame has been hailed as a visionary leader, and yet he has also become one of the most controversial. Many believe that there is a dark side to this story. No press freedom, no real opposition. Many of his opponents have fled the country, others in prison or found dead.
Kagame is a darling of the West, despite all of these criticisms against him. Unlike Paul Kagame and Paul Biya, these other leaders did not get to stay, because at some point, even though they were somehow the darling of the West, they fell apart because their policies were different from what the international community wanted from them.
Once hailed as an African liberation hero, Robert Mugabe will perhaps be best remembered as a tyrant who all but destroyed his country.
Ruthless regime began to show. Mugabe used bulldozers against his opponents. Others were slaughtered. The freedom fighter had morphed into a tyrant.
As long as dissidents come from a particular area, we will send troops to that area.
So this is how divisive Mugabe was. After Zimbabwe got their independence, the rest of the world, they saw Mugabe as this new guy, this new man who is going to save the African continent.
White farmers were evicted and arrested. By the turn of the century, Zimbabwe was in the grip of an economic crisis.
But of course, once he started implementing policies that did not go well with the international community. You saw all the sanctions.
The stories about Gaddafi killing his own people, the bombardment of Fashloom, the district in Tripoli, the use of rape, mass rape as a weapon, the use of Viagra tablets as a weapon. That's completely false.
But it was reported at the time, and it was reported by Al-Jazeera, Al-Arabiya, BBC, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all the TV networks in the West.
So you actually see a trend here, like Paul Biya and Paul Kagame, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, and Muammar Gaddafi of Libya were also once considered as good people and not dictators, as heroes in their countries. But of course, once their policy changed, they had to go because they did not dance to the tunes of the international community.
This resolution demands an immediate ceasefire and a complete end to violence and attacks against civilians.
So I keep asking myself, why are we voting in Africa? Why are we wasting our time on the line when we know we cannot choose and choose and choose and choose?
Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea, Namibia. Africa has tremendous business potential. I have so many friends going to your countries trying to get rich.
So you see, no matter how good an African leader performs, if you do not dance to the tunes of Western governments, you either don't get support, you are either sidelined, or they deliberately come after you in the case of Mugabe or in the case of Muammar Gaddafi. I do not think that the Western world should continue to hold the moral compass to Africa. Because you know why? These Western governments will work with these African leaders who are considered somehow bad in their country by their people. You know why? Because they toe the lines, they work in the interest of the Western government. But when they do not, they are considered as dictators, and then they are isolated and somehow sanctioned. You have to understand that this is a similar system that, especially from the colonial times, that created this whole big man politics in Africa, where you have one individual who is considered as the big man who runs the entire country. The bottom line is, we want an Africa that is prosperous, an Africa where people get to genuinely choose or choose their leaders through democratic process in elections without heavy influence at all from Western governments. We want an Africa where young people have little limitations to their growth. Any African leader who can deliver this, that is the sort of leader we expect the international community to support if you're willing to genuinely support the African continent to grow, to get out of the situation that the continent finds itself these days.
The quality of leadership in Africa has been improving. We've had 3 generations of leaders in my mind. Generation 1 are those who appeared in the 50s and 60s. These are people like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. The legacy they left is that they brought independence to Africa. They freed us from colonialism, and let's give them credit for that. They were followed by Generation 2. These are people that brought nothing but havoc to Africa. Think warfare, corruption, human rights abuses. This is the stereotype of the typical African leader that we typically think of. Mobutu Sese Seko from Zaire, Sani Abacha from Nigeria. The good news is that most of these leaders have moved on, and they were replaced by Generation 3. These are people like the late Nelson Mandela and most of the leaders that we see in Africa today, like Paul Kagame and so forth.
Some of these African leaders do not fit to this definition or description of Western democracy. But some of them, they are genuinely helping their people. Those who are not helping, we expect the international community to let their people know that these are the sort of leader they have. If you provide that kind of support, you are helping the African continent. But if you are doing this just in your own interest, not honestly thinking about the interest of people on the continent, then you're not helping. Instead, you are as bad as the dictator you tend to describe. That's all I had time for in this episode. If you want to get more interesting videos from Just Africa and from me, ABJ, subscribe, like this video and share it with your friends. Until the next one, catch you there.